Leaning toward the light, a quiet story of grief, memory, and the invisible threads that bind us long after words and time have gone silent. It started with the sound of a key turning in a lock that hadn't been used in years. The mechanism resisted at first, metal scraping against metal like an echo of old decisions. Then, with a reluctant click, the door opened. It groaned as if exhaling after holding in silence too long. The threshold felt like a border between two lifetimes, one that had ended quietly and one still stumbling forward. She stood there, hesitant, uncertain if she was intruding. The lease bore her name now, the result of paperwork and formalities, but the room beyond still belonged to someone else. Curtains hung in place, drawn just enough to let shadows pool on the floor. The air was still, tinged with a mixture of dried flowers and something faintly sour, lilies perhaps, or just the inevitable scent of time accumulating undisturbed. This had once been her sister's apartment. Before that, they'd shared an even smaller place. Two sisters packed into a room filled with cracked dreams and worn-out ambitions. Back then, privacy was a myth, and silence was something they borrowed only during sleep. They had outgrown that cramped past, or so they told themselves. But they never quite outgrew the distance. Her sister had lived here alone for the last 3 years of her life. And for 5 years they had not seen one another, not even once. The room was unnervingly orderly, as if it had been prepared for someone or preserved in a moment that had never fully passed. The floor was spotless, the dishes washed and set to dry. A teacup sat on the table, stained with a dried ring, abandoned mid-thought or mid-sip. It was this tiny, incomplete gesture that brought the silence to life and turned it from absence into ache. Objects seemed to whisper her sister's presence. A coat hung on its hook like it might be needed later. Keys rested in a ceramic dish shaped like a crooked leaf, glazed unevenly. Her sister had always been drawn to things that didn't strive for perfection. Wobbly mugs and asymmetrical artwork. Once, it had irritated her. Now it served as a quiet testament to a mind that found beauty in what others overlooked. Beneath the bed, a box revealed itself, plain, cardboard, almost invisible in its ordinariness. Inside were letters. Most were addressed to her. Most were unopened. Return to sender stamps scarred their surfaces. She hadn't moved. She hadn't changed her number. She had simply never replied. What she had refused to receive had still waited patiently, packed away like hope that hadn't given up. Reading them was like unlocking a room in the house of memory and finding it warm, untouched, as if the inhabitant had only just stepped away. The letters spoke of inconsequential things, books read, passing seasons, and a cat that waited at the window. But beneath those details lived the shape of what had gone unsaid. The fight that ended everything was never named. But in every sentence, the silence around it pulsed like a bruise. They had not grown up close. Childhood hadn't bound them with affection, only shared chores, arguments, and occasional truces. There was no cruelty, only proximity. Two lives unfolding in parallel, sometimes touching, mostly avoiding collision. She had assumed, perhaps hoped, that adulthood would draw them nearer. It hadn't. What grew instead was a fragile civility that collapsed without warning. And when it did, it fractured quietly. The last time they'd seen each other, her sister's weariness had been startling. Not the weariness of illness, but the heaviness of resignation. Eyes that had stopped reaching out. A question had been asked, and the answer, unspoken but understood, had been enough. She left, thinking it was strength to uphold a boundary, claiming her space. But years later, she wondered if it had only been fear. Her sister could sit with pain, with imperfection. She had never learned how. Her sister's funeral had passed like a whispered apology. Intimate. Sparse. She had chosen the back row, unsure if she deserved anything closer to grief's center. A friend, someone she'd never met, gave the eulogy. From her words, she learned her sister had worked at a bookshop and remembered what each customer read. It was the kind of detail that revealed a person in ways dates and achievements never could. She hadn't cried. Not because she didn't feel the loss, but because her grief had arrived too slowly to be loud. It settled behind her ribs like an anchor, invisible but constant. Some people mourned outwardly. She wore hers like an unremarkable coat, functional, unspoken, a part of her silhouette. She stayed in the apartment, sleeping on her sister's bed, not out of necessity, but reverence, as if leaving too soon would betray something sacred. She kept the windows open, letting the light soften the edges of the room. She drank tea the way her sister used to, stronger than she liked, unsweetened. She traced her sister's life through rituals, a rhythm she was only now learning. In a drawer, she found a photograph. The two of them beneath a cherry blossom tree, umbrellas in hand. Neither is smiling, neither is frowning, caught in some ambiguous peace. She could not remember the day, but her sister had framed it with care. The frame was wood, slightly chipped. Next to it a candle, half burned, waiting. The longer she stayed, the more she saw the details her sister had left behind. Scribbled lines of poetry in margins, a postcard with no recipient, a recipe, tried and revised across many versions. In the notes, too bitter, try with lemon, perfect for rainy days. It painted a picture of someone who had made peace with uncertainty, who had found ways to inhabit incompletion. On the windowsill, a plant wilted but was not lost. Leaves curled inward, soil arid. She watered it with tentative hands, unsure if it was still alive but unwilling to give up on it. It felt like an offering. A conversation reopened not with words, but with care. On her final night, she watched the world through her sister's kitchen window. A boy passed by with a dog. Two girls laughed, teetering on a sidewalk's edge. The world moved, indifferent. It always did. But somehow, it felt more piercing to witness its persistence from here, where so much had stilled. When she left, she took very little. The photograph, a single book, one of her sister's scarves. She resisted the urge to collect more, knowing it would turn her sister's life into something to curate, to explain. Some things were meant to stay behind, to be felt only in memory. Back home, the apartment felt both too full and too empty. The familiar furniture, the stack of unread mail, the soft hum of appliances, it all returned without invitation, settling into the rhythm she had momentarily stepped away from. Yet something had shifted. There was an absence woven through everything now, not loud or urgent, but persistent, like the feeling of missing a step in the dark. She placed the photograph on her desk, propping it against the base of a small lamp. It wasn't there as a shrine or a symbol of closure. It simply existed as a reminder that some connections defied erasure, even after years of silence. The image of two sisters beneath blossoms, neither of them remembered, lingered like a half-spoken memory, steady and undecided in its meaning. She started walking more, not for exercise or escape, but because it helped. Her sister had once believed in the restorative power of walking, of letting thoughts unravel in motion. Now, step by step, she tried to understand that rhythm. Through parks, along sidewalks, past closed cafes and open windows, she walked without needing direction. She noticed more the changing sky, the shape of trees, and the discarded wrappers near benches. The world no longer blurred past her. It asked to be seen. Her sister's book sat on the bedside table, a slim novel with dog-eared corners and underlined passages. She read it slowly, almost reverently, pausing often to imagine what had made one sentence stand out and what emotion had rested behind each pen stroke. The pages whispered a language she was only beginning to learn, one that existed in margins and silences, and the weight of unspoken thoughts. She became quieter, not withdrawn, but more careful with her words. Her conversations took on more stillness, as if she were listening not just to others, but to something internal she had once ignored. Her boundaries remained, but their edges softened. She realized that protection didn't always have to be a fortress. Sometimes it could be a doorway left ajar. The plant survived, slowly, stubbornly, its leaves unfurled again. She rotated it toward the light, watered it gently, and trimmed its edges when needed. It leaned sideways but grew upward, a little uneven but alive. She took comfort in this small, silent resilience, a piece of her sister's world continuing. Weeks passed, then months. Life resumed its indifferent rhythm, but her pace had changed. She no longer rushed to fill silences. She let emails wait. She declined invitations that felt performative. She stopped measuring her life against others. There was a kind of peace in that detachment, not numbness, but clarity. Loss had simplified her priorities. What remained mattered more. Sometimes, while walking or reading, her mind would drift into conversations that never happened. Not dramatic ones, not full of apologies or confrontations, just quiet imaginings of what could have been. An afternoon shared, a meal cooked together, a story exchanged on a rainy evening. These moments lived only in her thoughts, but they soothed something raw. They were the small reconciliations of grief aloud in place of answers. She found herself writing again, not letters to send, but notes on scrap paper, in margins on the back of receipts, observations, fragments of memory, things she wished she had said when there had still been time. She tucked them away in drawers between books and beside the photograph. She didn't need them to be found. She just needed them to exist. Once, on a gray morning, she returned to the neighborhood where her sister had lived. She didn't go inside. The building was the same, though the windows looked brighter. New curtains, new lives. A different story is unfolding. She paused outside for a few moments, not to reclaim anything, but to acknowledge what had been. She didn't linger. Seasons shifted. Spring has returned, trees bloomed, echoing the forgotten photograph. The city grew louder again. People rushed more. The world continued its orbit, untouched by her private mourning. But she remained steady, grounded in her quiet rituals. Tea without sugar. Walks in the early evening, the smell of old paper and the hum of a distant street lamp. She sometimes thought of her sister as if she still occupied a parallel room somewhere, not gone but relocated, not erased but unreachable. She imagined her at a desk, reading, feeding a cat, turning a page. That image, though unprovable, offered her more comfort than any philosophical certainty. Over time, her relationship with the past changed. Regret softened into reflection. The fight that had once defined their parting lost its sharpness. She no longer clung to who had been right or who had failed. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the shape of her sister's absence, how it had carved a space in her, and how that space now allowed light to enter in unexpected places. She started volunteering at a library near her home. It felt natural, though she never consciously made the connection. She found herself remembering names and recommending books based on small details people had shared. Without realizing it, she echoed her sister's kindness in subtle, deliberate ways. When people asked about her sister, she spoke of her without hesitation. Not in long stories, but in truths. That she was quiet, that she loved odd things, that she made tea too strong and kept trying to perfect a recipe no one else knew about, that she had been softer in ways the world didn't always reward. She did not try to romanticize her. She just tried to be honest. The plant on her windowsill leaned toward the sun, one side heavier than the other. She never straightened it. It didn't need symmetry to be beautiful. It just needed care. On quiet evenings, she sometimes caught herself imagining her sister's voice, not speaking, just present, like a hum beneath the noise of living. She didn't force these moments. She let them arrive and fade on their own. They weren't hauntings. They were reminders that absence didn't mean severance, that love could exist without continuation. She never returned to the apartment again. But in the folds of her days, her sister lingered, not as a wound, but as a thread woven through her changed self. A presence made visible in small kindnesses, in remembered details, in the gentleness she now allowed herself. The photograph remained on her desk. The frame gathered dust. She never cleaned it off. It felt right that it stayed slightly flawed. The plant grew slowly, persistently. She did too.